a lot of issues prevalent in any given society, one that has been very disturbing and of concern all over the world is sex trafficking of children. In today's program, we will talk exactly of that and how it is going to affect countries like Pakistan, United Kingdom, and rest of the world. And for this, I have with me in our London studios of AR1 News, Richard Martin, who heads the SCDD 6 and 9 at Scotland Yard. With him is Tony Schiena, who's the Secretary General of IC30. He's an expert on counter-sex trafficking. He's a lieutenant on ICAC, which is the International Crime Against Children Anti-Trafficking US Task Force. Tony focuses energy on his work with securing and protecting children on the internet from child predators and combating sex trafficking of children. Tony and Richard, welcome to the program. How do you intend to stop this, which you've taken it as a very passionate thing for you, this child abuse, the sex trafficking of children, and of course, you know, what is going on in the world? So how do you intend to achieve your objective?
I think everybody has a social responsibility to do something about it. And in the end, the problem is so big that really self-policing and parental policing is really necessary, especially when it comes to the internet. You know, the internet has changed the world, and it continues to, and it's going to get more and more important in our everyday life. So for any task force or any agency to be able to combat that, they need the help of the public. They need the help of actual parents policing their own children, because you don't know what's going on behind these screen names and things like that. You know, no one can keep track of all of that. So a big part of our endeavor is social awareness. That's the reason that we're here, you know, on the show, for example, so people can understand how big a problem this is.
I mean, my officers have been in from faraway places such as Bangkok to India to Tanzania to Eastern Europe, because obviously we get a lot of different victims from a lot of different countries coming into London, because London is still seen as a place that is very wealthy, very affluent, and where people can buy anything they want if they've got the right money.
And how do you see countries like Afghanistan, Pakistan, and of course the Middle East?
I think it's really important, you know, if you look at some of the drivers behind trafficking, you know, of course you've got the money for the people that are doing it, but for the victims, a lot of these victims are coming from impoverished countries. So where you have a war zone, where perhaps the government hasn't quite been set up, where people need to travel because they have no opportunities, obviously you get a lot of victims from. So Afghanistan in its current state, you know, a lot of Eastern European countries that were once in the, you know, the USSR, all these areas where people either feel they don't have a life choice, or let's say the government infrastructure is very confused, where people can slip in and take people, you're going to have problems and people coming from there.
So Tony, how do you intend to educate the people, the children, and of course, even on the governmental side? Do you have any plans for that?
Sure. You know, the organization does numerous things. We have numerous efforts. You know, one of them is education software for children through IC30 and the Safe Surfing Foundation. So we'll have software for, say, 9 to 12, 12 to 15. You know, children need to be made aware of what's going on the internet. Part of that drive is making it mandatory for schooling of, you know, the pitfalls of the internet at school. You know, you give a kid software that's educational, they're not going to watch that at home. So you kind of need it to be mandatory in school, let them understand it. And then that ties into letting governments understand how important this is a crisis right now, and it's getting worse. And it's a question of protecting one's own children.
How can you help them?
I suppose from a policing point of view, one is it's actually accepting that there is a problem and this happens, and you know, we have to do that in the UK. We have to convince people these things are happening. The second is having those links and those connections between ourselves and the law enforcement agencies over there, and then sharing information. You know, from a law enforcement point of view, it's very good to share information, to share identities about criminal gangs, criminal networks, and share intelligence and information so that we can prosecute them both back in Pakistan if it's in Pakistan, and obviously back in the UK if it's in the UK.
Now, how about you? How can you help the situation? I'll again specify you to Pakistan.
Right, and you know, also touching on what Richard just said, you know, with ICAC Task Force in the US, you know, Safe Surfing Foundation, IC30, we've worked out a plan where we can actually train foreign police force and government, whether it is training them on the software and supplying them with the tracking and security software that we have access to, training them how to actually, track what's going on in their own countries. So we're trying to work that out and see how we can help foreign nations by doing that, and then you open the doors to communication again.
So you're ready to help Pakistan?
Absolutely. I mean, that's law enforcement perspective. When it comes to, awareness and stuff like that, the education software, security software, we do a lot of public service announcements that educate the public on the pitfalls of trafficking, the internet.
Do it free of charge for the country?
Yeah, we're a non-profit organization. We just want countries to really abide by our treaty or come aboard our treaty, which just, basically helps us help them.
And now, Richard, coming to you, obviously you work here with Scotland Yard, an arm of the government. How much, because political governments come and go, as far as your work is concerned, does it change when a new political government comes in, or does it remain the same and you continue carrying on a course or a policy which has been set out?
Yeah, government doesn't really affect us. I mean, the British system is that we are not subject to the rule of politicians. We have a tripartite structure in this country, which means that politicians do not direct what we do. The Home Secretary may set an overall task of, reducing crime, but then how we do that is very much down to police officers. We have operational independence. My objectives really are set by the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. However, human trafficking is something that we brought in. We created the unit 18 months ago. I'm not doing it from a charitable point of view because obviously I'm employed, but the same as Tony, I'm very, very passionate about dealing with trafficking. I'm very passionate about protecting children, so it's actually a pleasure to do what I do and have the resources to be able to do that.
I think it boils down to responsibility again. I started out in law enforcement, as part of a conscription age. So I at 18, 19, I was already in law enforcement and military work. It's really coming back to that. And I can thank a person who was instrumental in forming ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force in the U.S., which is Sheriff Mike Brown. I was on my way to Iraq actually, doing some defensive tactics training and teaching, and met him at Dulles Airport in Washington. And he spoke to me about internet crimes, about trafficking, which I knew very little about. And I told him when I come back, I'll go and see him in Virginia. And when I went and saw him, he showed me stuff that would affect me forever, stuff that I dare not repeat because it's that vile. Because what I witnessed was what my fellow man is doing to children and babies and stuff that's just the unthinkable. Now, I think if you have the ability to do something about it, and you have skills to do something about it, and you don't, then pretty much you're as good as them. That is my opinion on it. So, we're just trying to do our bit and fight a crime that I think is the most horrific crime you could possibly think of.
Obviously, what he does is strictly confidential, and I cannot be announcing it on television how he operates because that is his domain. So, Richard, what do you do here as far as trafficking concerned, all kinds of trafficking? What does the police do here, and how much of a role does the Interpol have to play into this?
We are very fortunate in the Metropolitan Police. We have a dedicated trafficking team. So I have 40 officers whose sole remit and the most important thing they do is to counter human trafficking. So that's human trafficking in any of its guises, from child trafficking to adult trafficking. We run a lot of very sensitive inquiries. We work very closely with foreign law enforcement agencies because, of course, trafficking is a global problem. It's not just a London problem. If a criminal gang brings in traffic victims here, then part of that gang is going to be overseas. So not only will we try and find the victims and rescue them, and we do that with a lot of partners that are involved in trafficking, but what we'll also do is follow that criminal gang wherever it is in the world. Just to give you an example, this year my officers have been deployed in over 20 different countries across the world, working with local law enforcement police to actually identify who's behind it and put them behind bars where they belong.
And as far as your officers overseas are concerned, are they stationed in the Asian countries as well?
They're actually stationed here, but they will travel over to deal with inquiries.
How serious would both of you would see it now?
It's one of the most serious crimes in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would concur with that. I think whether it's child exploitation online or whether it's human trafficking, I don't think there's anything, in my view, that is as harmful as what we see. You know, when you see what happens to people, you see what children are exposed to, you see what adults are exposed to, and the inhuman treatment they get, you know, from being beaten to raped to locked into closed doors. You know, I don't think there's anything as harmful. It's absolutely essential that we sell the message like we're doing here today, that people are talking about it, because I think Tony alluded to it earlier on, you know, there's a lot communities can do about this. You know, people know what's going on in their communities. People can self-protect and self-police, and it really is important people get behind this.
How can you help the children in Pakistan right now? Because obviously Pakistan is a country which has really come up. There's a lot of internet access. And how do the people in that country, you know, are safe from these sort of predators?
You see, I think this is the right time for a country like Pakistan, where the internet community and computers and that are on the rise and not completely in every household yet. Okay, when that kind of situation is happening, it's the right time to already implement an education system. Education is paramount for children. Another thing is, you know, meeting with government. You know, meeting with, for example, the former prime minister, meeting with, you know, future politicians and making them aware of the problem. Have them come on board our treaty. We have an intergovernmental treaty that we're having signed between governments. So I've been to Ukraine, Cambodia, Middle East, and we're trying to get that kind of support so that when a nation, for example, signs our treaty, we give them all the education software we have. Everything's for free. You know, the security software. You know, as much as we have, we give, because we understand how important this is and what a big problem this is. That's why I've grabbed this, you know, very important subject and cause and held on to it for this amount of time, because you know how important children are, and if our slogan is a child's innocence can never be replaced. You know, once that's taken from them, they are broken people for the rest of their lives, and who knows what that fosters in the future.
And is Pakistan a signatory to this convention?
Well, with your help, perhaps it will be. You know, you kindly introduced me to the former Prime Minister, and hopefully now we can concretely put something together, because it's for the benefit of everybody.
And Richard, now obviously you deal in criminology. These very people, if they are not, let's say harnessed or, you know, sort of treated properly now, where do you think they'll end up eventually?
Are you talking about the offenders?
Yes, the offenders, and of course the new people who are brought in.
Yeah, I think, you know, the offenders just grow in power. If they are not tackled, they become immune, you know, and if they feel they can get away with it, they will get away with it. Most criminals are entrepreneurs of crime. They will go wherever the money goes, or if they're abusers, they will abuse wherever it's easier to abuse. And I think, you know, I think the Western world is playing catch up. I think Tony alluded to this. I think we're trying to play catch up and put in these safety nets and the things that Tony's doing. Whereas with Pakistan, you have the opportunity to almost get ahead of the game a little bit more, because, you know, you are coming online and people are getting more computers and things like that. But there's a lot we can do on our own. There's a lot parents can do. There's a lot of training and education, as Tony's already alluded to. And, you know, and in relation to trafficking, it's about educating people, you know, educating people that there are people out there that may exploit them. If people are going for jobs overseas, make sure that job is a real job, you know. Don't come and suddenly be imprisoned and then be expected to, you know, have to sell your body for money. There's a lot of education and awareness that I think is really, really important, because as much as it you know, makes me very happy to be able to rescue victims and prosecute people that have committed crime, I'd rather those people weren't victims in the first place.
Like, in coming on to you, Tony, do you feel that, you know, if these children are not taken on board, and as what we've seen in Pakistan, the children who have been misled in the madrasas have gone onto the wrong paths, do you feel that these sort of people will again diverse and probably be on the negatives?
Well, you know, I think psychologically you're so damaged and hurt from an event like that it's irreparable. You know, you're looking at it's the numbers are something like a $32 billion industry is trafficking in its totality. And
$32 billion?
$32 billion, 80% of that is sex related. So, you know, they have very scheming ways of bringing children on board, accosting them, one being the internet, but when they bring these children on board, then there's cases of children being used to go and solicit and recruit other children. You know, innocent children don't know what they're doing, going back to school and doing that. And suddenly these children disappear. You know, the biggest problem I can find is, yes, I spend time in Cambodia and Eastern European countries. The problem is that the West doesn't realize how important a problem it also is within our borders, whether it be the UK or the US. Back in the US, people don't want to think, oh, this is happening in my own backyard. They're thinking Thailand, Cambodia, but it's happening in your own backyard. And that just shows what a big problem it is. With the internet, it's just connecting the entire world, and there's no, social or national boundaries. But whether it be trafficking through the internet or syndicates, I mean, this is it's already at a point where, and I'm sure Richard agrees that they're ahead of us, because when you have, it's like he said, it's for criminals, they're entrepreneurs. So they go where the money is, right? Sex trafficking is, part of trafficking, which is a $32 billion industry. So imagine the access, the money they have to fuel the enterprises, that we now have to catch up to. And that the only way to do that is parental policing and self-policing, because everyone's budgets get cut. That's a problem with that law enforcement, faces here, faces in the U.S. Yes, it's wonderful having a task force. Now you got to look at potentially losing more members of your task force to a crime that's one of the biggest crimes in the world. It's a very tough subject.
These people who do it, what kind of methods and methodology they use? How do they do it?
Well, I guess if I look at trafficking, a lot about trafficking is, if you say to somebody what's trafficking mean to you, they think people get kidnapped and driven across borders. What we see in the UK is something slightly different. People are conned into coming to the UK, basically. So you might have a new boyfriend that arrives on the scene with your young daughter. He convinces her to come to London for a romantic break. We certainly had cases of that. And then when they land in London, they are handed over to a gang of men. She is placed into a room and made to sleep with 30 men a day, and her passport was taken from her. So she thinks she's coming on a romantic trip. Another classic is people applying for jobs in England. So they will put adverts in the newspapers in the country that they come from, advertising wonderful jobs, come to London, earn lots of money, and of course, again, as soon as they arrive, their passports are taken from them and they're thrown into brothels. That's certainly around the sex piece. If it comes to domestic servitude, people are brought in as domestic help, but very soon again, they're locked, they're chained to the kitchen sink, they are beaten, and they're never paid any money. So a lot of what we see is around people pretending to offer things that are just not there.
Tony, coming to you, as far as, again, these children are concerned, are they dealt in the same way, that somebody pretends that, he's the same age or she's the same age, they use different names, and then they go and con these people?
Sure. I think, there's certainly a distinction between the child predator on the internet that is basically fueling his sexual desires, and the entrepreneurial gangster or crime syndicate, which is obviously, and I spoke about numbers, these are very big syndicates earning lots of money. We're talking billions of dollars. Both are as evil as each other. Whether it is posing as, a certain aged boy or girl to solicit another, or, the actual physical trafficking in horrendous situations like Haiti, for example. You have an earthquake that's, I think it was 7.8 or something, horrific. And, when you have the surviving population of adults trying to look through rubble to find, anyone who's alive, you got these traffickers driving around in pickup trucks, offering children water and food. And what's happening is they're being trafficked. It gets more and more horrific. I was in correspondence with the Chief Justice Office in Haiti before the earthquake. The problem they were coming to me about was orphans being trafficked. So it's a very dark and evil crime, and it's not just your flasher, level. It's now all the way through and really transcending every echelon of society. It's not just that crazy-looking person. Unfortunately, it's people living on your street. Unfortunately, it's up the way to diplomats. There are numerous cases through ICAC task force that, even former police chiefs 2 weeks ago, an agent from ICE in the U.S., was also caught for for soliciting a minor. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but that is the problem. It's an epidemic.
And it's big business.
It's huge business. I mean, if you're looking at 32 billion in traffic and 80% is sexually, sexual orientated, then I mean, you're up against a major syndicate and problem, syndicates. It's not just this enemy you can identify either. It's, they're everywhere and they're huge, and there's, controlled by big syndicates, and there's also those who are just predators who are fueling their sexual desires.
And how much of an illegal trade, illegal immigrants who come in through this way?
A lot of the victims we see come from Europe, and one of the biggest challenges we have in the UK is that a lot of countries now are in the European Common Travel Area, so they can legitimately come into the UK, and it's made it very much cheaper for traffickers. If you'd gone back 2 years ago, I'd have said the biggest amount of victims we had trafficking were from Singapore, from Bangkok and China. But because now it's much cheaper to ship people in almost legally and bring them in, it's much cheaper for the traffickers. They don't have to buy false passports, they don't have to make up stories or pretend visas. They can actually ship them in quite easily. If we look at domestic servitude, to be fair, a lot of those that we find the victims are from the Indian continent, whether that's Pakistan, whether that's India, but they come in legally. They're brought in by their employers. And we talk about diplomatic immunity. Half the cases I deal with are diplomats that have brought people in, of which of course I can't prosecute.
Really, from these countries?
Yeah.
My word. The other thing was that as far as recovery is concerned, what should be the method, or again, the modus operandi, where these children, either they are kidnapped or, been sold away and things like that, how do you recover these kids?
Well, that's a whole nother set of problems. Dealing with kids that have been abused is obviously a very sensitive subject. Some parts of the world, maybe in Africa, also in Southeast Asia, there are instances of kids being rescued, given back to their families just to be resold by their families. Now that's a serious economic problem and cultural little issues that they're having. Economics, like anything, plays a part into most crime, right? So, it's finding safe havens for them that they can find, the treatment they need safely is something we also have to look at. It's such a wide problem. That's why we need all the help, we can get also. There's only so much you can do, and that's why we try and make people aware, and by making people aware, we can gain their support. But caring for these children are a major issue, and really needs really specialist treatment for that. You can imagine how fragile a poor child who's been sexually abused 8 times a day is when you receive them or you've rescued them.
Tony, thank you very much. Richard, thank you very much for being here. And thank you for watching Q&A with PJ Mir. This is really an important issue, and one which needs immediate, I would say, attention of all around the globe. Why? Because if the children are not protected, they will become victims of the perverts in a society. And these are the children of the future who will one day lead their nations. Look at Steve Jobs, the Apple CEO, a child from a Syrian father and an American mother, adopted by the Jobs family, turned out to be an icon of the modern day civilized world. Why? Because the right opportunity was there. Let's give our new ones the same. Khuda Hafiz.